everyone. My name is Reverend Liên Shutt, she, they pronouns. I'm zooming in from Grayton Rancheria territory, otherwise known as Petaluma. Before we really get into it, Kaira and I wanted to do what we like to call fellowship, which I first got introduced to in the Buddhist realm from Sahara Godfrey at EBMC. So this is what I kind of came up with as, do you remember Hollywood Squares? For those who remember Hollywood Squares, except I call this the non-misogynistic version. So we're going to have you unmute and then say hi to the rectangles around you. And then don't forget the other rectangles. And then I like to say also the other pages as rectangles. So it's just going to be a cacophony of sounds, and use people's names so that it just feels more like we're actually saying hi to each other in this Zoom realm that we're in. All right. Does that make sense to people? Okay. All right. Have fun. Go.
There's always these unknowns with Zoom. Well, it's so lovely to see your faces. Another practice we can do just briefly as we get started is what I love. Sister Peace says, eye hugging, and just looking at each other's faces and hugging each other, appreciating each other with our eyes and taking each other in. Even if we don't see faces, if we just see names, that's fine. We can just appreciate the other folks on this call. So we wanted to just name how we got to know each other, Liên and I, to start our conversation. And I first met Reverend Liên on a retreat for Generation X Dharma teachers, and felt a beautiful connection through Reverend Lien's Vietnamese heritage. Though you were raised in the US by your adoptive family, I felt I was adopted in a way by a Vietnamese monastic community, Thich Nhat Hanh's community. So we share that. And a lovely piece was that Reverend Liên invited me to be a co-host on a podcast focused on BIPOC Dharma teachers, opening access. Not sure if I've forgotten the name. Reverend Liên continues to host that podcast with a few other teachers, but I really appreciated the chance to work on that. So I'll pass it to you, and whatever you might wish to share too.
Thank you, Kaira Jewel. With opening Dharma access, listening to BIPOC teachers, and it is also with Lama Kama Yeshe, and so the three of us started it out, and we're all Gen X teachers, and we all met at the same place. And Kaira Jewel was very busy, so I had to move off. And Sister Peace now is one of our co-hosts, and also Dalila Bothwell. So we're in our second season. So that's on the webpage too. Yeah. I was just really fascinated how us teachers teach. And I think it's been really enlivening and connecting to talk to other teachers about that and how our experience shaped the way we teach. And certainly I think, the connection with Kaira Jewel, that resonance that happens. And thank you for naming I like to say the tangible detail. And then there's also just that intangible of, I think, a really dedication to the Dharma and to ending suffering. That I know I really feel it from Kaira Jewel, and the carefulness and the mindfulness of her attention. And she was right away, asked how she could be supportive of the book. And she's on the back cover, her endorsement. So go check it out if you haven't. So thank you. All right, shall we get into the nitty-gritty here? All right. So we wanted to make this much more of a conversation. So I won't say too much about the book, except that it did arise out of, I've been reframing the Engage for Noble Truth as a restorative model, or the Four Noble Truths. After actually at that Gen X conference in 2017, it was after the rise of yet another round of sexual misconduct in a lot of convert Buddhist circles. And so the right use of power was brought in, which I really love. I went away thinking, well, I've been to so many trainings and other models are brought in. Nonviolent communication. I can't remember, in the early 2000 was something about talking, some book that was really big. And I like them all and swallow them all and use them all. And I thought, something in the teaching must be there. And so in the Engage for Noble Truth version, we really start out with, say, besides just that there's dukkha in the world, that there's hurt and harm has been done. And I think that's really important as a restoration model, that we really start as things are. So there's something that I kind of pulled together as I was doing this book, which started out as really a manuscript or writings to accompany Lotus Rising from the Mud, which is a course on the Engage for Noble Truth and the Eightfold Path that is as a response to Asian American students asking me in the early 2020 and then on about how to deal with the anti-Asian violence against us at that time, another round again. And then with the death of George Floyd, then the Dharma being anti-racist was another format in which all of our locations. So the book is really very much to talk about how does our racialization in the system of white supremacy culture impacts us all, for one, and then two, fragments us and pit us against each other. And so the suffering is completely felt, right? And as I was writing this as a company for the course, not really as a book per se, it really, as I've talked about with other Dharma teachers, I don't know if this is your experience, Kaira, but sometimes you start out with a Dharma talk and you're like, I know what this is going to be about. And then as you're doing it, it takes its own course. And so that was a moment in which I was like, what am I going to do? It really calls for these stories of my experience and to really uplift Asian American voices, and in particular in convert Buddhist settings. So that's, even though I was born in Vietnam as a Buddhist, I've really, because of my lack of language, Vietnamese language, I really have practiced in convert Buddhist settings. And I'm totally appreciative of it. And yet there was a lot, the edge of my suffering and pain often was the meeting the wall of white supremacy culture and the lack of understanding of my experiences and how to support me as an Asian American, as a BIPOC person, to really go through our own difficulties, right, as we practice to open up more and more. And so in writing this book, I have kind of framed it as this, and using the Eightfold Path also, is first we have to acknowledge what is. Right? So in the first noble truth then is hurt and harm has happened. Because for restoration to happen, we have to admit to the problem. This is why when there's conflict, you have a mediator to come in so that you agree on what the issue is, right? Just as we saw during the pandemic and after George Floyd, how that young Black woman wrote Merriam-Webster and said, hey, you just define racism as a personal thing, but it's a systemic thing. And that's when it shifted. Like a lot of us already knew that, but when the dictionary makes it so, then it becomes something that we all can point to, and then the larger culture is admitting to its systemic issue. And so the Engage version is very much to touch on the systemic issue, but we start out by saying things as they are. Right? So acknowledging what is. Now, part of that is the second noble truth, which is really to look at how we were conditioned to see things in a way that is not necessarily just our own, but in fact, we're taught and enforced ways of thinking, feeling, viewing the world. And in essence, that's practice, right? We come to practice and we are asked to shift our understanding of the world into suffering and the end of suffering, or the Four Noble Truths. In the second in the engaged version, we ask more of a systemic lens, to bring in the systemic lens, versus, for I know in my experience in a lot of convert setting, especially, and I would say in the popular mindfulness, like by that I mean a broader, right? There is that very much like, this is a self practice. And so it can take away that sense of like, this is your suffering if you only work on it, if you only rethink it, if you shift your thinking, then things will change. And there is that without a doubt. And yet there's systemic forces that shape how things shift. And so we bring in that lens more. And in the book, I talk about it as in the net of Indra, to focus more on the net than the jewels itself, right? So that's part of acknowledging what is, and then knowing what shifts are especially needed. Part of that is, again, seeing the net, seeing the conditions as systemic versus just as individual, and then learning how to put those shifts into practice. So that's the gift, I think, of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, in particular, the fourth of the Four Noble Truths, right? It gives us very much what is considered skillful or wholesome as a classic wording, and then it gives us way in which we can be skillful. And so the book goes through that with a race lens and other anti-oppression lens. All right, so having said that, I want to do a little practice for us. All right, so in this, it's, don't look at it, but when you get the book, page 102. So I'm going to lead us through this mindful reflection, right? So perhaps I'll invite you to take a meditative posture. If you're comfortable and closing your eyes, or in whatever way that helps you to pull in internally. All right. So this is mindful reflection on diffusing othering. As in all practices, please check in with yourself right now, and any prompt I give you, please pick one that is manageable now, right? There's no need to push through anything. We're just being with ourselves and reflecting on how this can be useful. How can we be skillful as we go through this? You're going to imagine yourself across from someone whom you're having difficulties with. Again, choose an easy difficult. Now turn your attention inward. What is a mildly strong emotion you're experiencing when you think of this? It might be a little sticky. Now bring your attention to a body location with this. And label or name or note one sensation, physical sensation, you're experiencing as you think of this mildly strong emotion. And so, is there a sensation you're experiencing that's difficult to be with? Again, it could be a mild difficulty. How can you attend to that sensation to ease it? Even as I said it for you at the last sentence, I felt myself taking a deep breath. So perhaps it's just that. Feel free to move if that's what's needed. Perhaps a metta phrase. Whenever it is, give yourself the permission, whatever it is, to attend to that difficult sensation right now. Is it dropping the shoulders? Sometimes I find myself with a fist. Is it opening your fist? All right, just rest in that way that you've attended to your difficult sensation, so it eases it. Now imagine really looking at that person, not to fix them or yourself, just perhaps like Kaira showed with Sister Peace, a hug look, really connecting. And then imagine that they've been doing the same exercise. What might they discover? How might they attend to it? And what might be similarities in both your experiences? Doesn't have to be many. All right, some deep breaths or relaxing of shoulders or shifting, whatever it is that needs to happen for you right now, and then come back into the room whenever you're ready. All right. And now, because I kind of messed it up a little bit there, Kaira Joel, I'm actually going to read you a couple experiences, and you're going to imagine what are sensations as you, not imagine, connect with yourself, and what are sensations you're experiencing as you hear these couple stories that I'm going to bring up. Okay, I'm supposed to do it during the reflection. All right. In a one day people of color retreat a while back, a non-Asian BIPOC teacher said that Buddhism came from the white teachers like his own who, quote, brought it back from Asia, end quote. When my Chinese American friend voiced that her grandmother came to the United States around 1870 and was a Buddhist, his answer was, that doesn't matter. That's not what I'm talking about. Buddhism came from India, from Asia, and has been practiced throughout Asia for over 2.5 millennia. Then, this past year, in the same white-centered convert Buddhist meditation center, at a silent 9-day retreat I attended, a person in Q&A asked a Black teacher, how come quietness and stillness were so emphasized in Buddhism? The teacher's go-to answer was essentially, if it was a whole bunch of Black people who had gone to Asia to bring Buddhism back, you bet it would have been more singing and dancing. To ignore the long history of Asian American heritage Buddhism in North America and simply adopt a white-centered convert Buddhist version and perspectives, and thus continuing to minimize, invisibilize, and erase Asian heritage practitioners' presence and contributions, is to collude in the system of white supremacy through appropriation.
And, you know, as Reverend Liên and I were speaking about this important topic in the book, and also how we wanted to share, how we wanted to step into this river together here tonight, we were speaking about the importance of which any group that has some kind of power that's conferred to them in a mainly white institution, like these retreat centers that you referred to in your story, that we want to have the awareness of using that power to uplift voices that are not often heard. So we spoke about how in different contexts there are, say, Black teachers or Latinx teachers or teachers of whatever non-white background who may be invited in and be in positions of some power or authority, and that we want to use that position to make sure that voices not just from our group are heard, right? So that's part of what we were talking about, this really seeing also how white supremacy can cause one group to be protective about its position and not be as inclusive of another group's experience. And that's not always, it's very often not intentional. It's something we just don't recognize happening. So just really wanting to shine the light there. And I had thought of a few moments in my life of teaching where I was aware I could be more inclusive, coming from a Black and biracial context. One of the things I mentioned to Liên was just noticing in the Garrison BIPOC Sangha that we guide on Thursdays at noon. We always finish with a song that we play music at the end. And I've been aware over time, I was like, oh, I tend to pick music that is mainly made by Black musicians, and sometimes other groups. But I thought, oh, I can be more inclusive of because our Garrison Sangha is very much represents all different BIPOC groups. So that's one, just a kind of small way that I was noticing how I could open my awareness more. And also just to name, I think I led a group a couple of years ago with another teacher that was looking at racialized trauma through a dharmic lens. And there were BIPOC groups, white groups that were separately studying together. And we also had a Black group, we had an Asian group. And in our Black group, when this happened during all of this violence toward Asian American women, this course was happening in 2021. And there was an awareness in the Black group of, we can really say racism is built on anti-Blackness, and that other groups find their positionality often in contrast to Blackness, even as BIPOC identities. And so often that's why the term BIPOC starts with Black and Indigenous, because those are the groups that often are at the bottom. But what was very powerful in this Black group was this really wanting to attend to what was happening in that moment for Asian folks, and saying, in that group, hey, we know that we've really experienced what it's like to be forgotten, to be violated, to be invisibilized. We want to give Asian folks the center right now, given what's happening. We know what it's like to have everything else, every other identity defined as not Black, as against Blackness. But still, in this moment, we really want to care for our Asian siblings and acknowledge, what's happening for them. So there was this very gracious, like, let us step to the background so that we can foreground that experience right now. And I found that to be a very beautiful insight that the group was able to practice. So let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Kaira Jewel. And I'll just also say, and that when we were talking, Kaira Jewel and I, about this, there's a story in, I think, chapter 9, Skillful Living, that is very much that question about, in the white supremacy culture, it is pretty much dialogue as black and white. And in fact, for many Asians, and perhaps other Latinx, I can't speak for from that location, but many Asians, when we're asked to assimilate, we are asked to assimilate for white or for Black in a way, because of that dichotomy. And so it's this false binary that we all get caught in. And so at times, though, part of the minimization of Asian American racism is that we are asked to be compared to that, right? And if we don't behave in a way that seems for Blacks, then we can be accused as being white. And so that's a very difficult position to be in. And I really appreciate your question. And I had written, this was an old experience, and it highlighted how racial dynamics and talking is really difficult. We're not taught how to do that very much. I think maybe certainly a bit more. And in a way, this is one of the few in the Buddhist convert scene, isn't it? That we're really talking about it. I were talking before this about how, wow, many people signed up for this because this is a big topic right now, because there's a lot of interest, and rightly so, because there's a lot of tension between BIPOC is a huge category. And so there's so many layers to that. And we need to talk about it and source it out in a way so that we don't replicate the learned ways of having to choose for or against, and also as colluding in white supremacy culture of othering others because we've been othered, right? Yes, and even in Asian American, it's a huge category. In fact, we talk about in Buddhism, there's a whole discussion. On one level, the BIPOC term works well in the larger culture, and yet in Buddhism, it pains a lot of Asian Americans because this came from Asia. Buddhism came from Asia. And yet there's no Asian in BIPOC, right? And so there's that. And then within the Asian American label is huge. And so how is it that we uplift South Asians, where Buddhism came from? I know through my experience, any Asian teachers I saw on the teaching platform was, of East Asian descent, occasionally Southeast Asian, right? I mean, I did not really see Thich Nhat Hanh like on an everyday thing, in a huge sense. So I don't, yes, great, but not in my retreats or interacting with me. I wasn't so lucky as Kaira Jewel, right? So it's very nuanced, this kind of thing. And so we wanted to really open that up. And I really appreciate how Kaira Jewel was willing to bring this conversation to that point, because there was a point in which, and I know I started, it was like, okay, well, let's talk about your experience too, so that the question of how do we open up this? What would I say to that Black person now from the Skillful Living chapter. And the thing that I would say is, we are given this false sense that there's like a pie. You all know that, right? Supposedly there's a pie of resources. And if you take a piece, then you take it away from someone else. So we all want to keep our piece of the pie once we are supposedly given it. And so the whole idea is that that's a false setup, a delusional concept that we've been taught. And so our practice is just keep opening up to more views, being inclusive of views. There's no limit to inclusion. There's no limit to opening up. And our practice is, yes, skillful view is to understand the Four Noble Truths and karma. But karma is one way to think about karma is that what have we inherited? What kind of ideas and concepts and behaviors have we inherited? And what are we going to do with that? That's the point of karma. What are you going to do about it? And so that's what we're asking each other. What we want to say, or I want to say, what I think is the issue is that we want them to be there to be specificity and affinity. We're not saying BIPOC means you have one person every time, right? We're saying that there are areas in which we can pay more attention, right? I think if you went to a retreat and which was for Black people and that mirrored you, fantastic. More of those should happen. And when there's a BIPOC retreat, in fact, the first BIPOC retreat on the West Coast did not have an Asian teacher. And you can go listen to one of the podcasts on my site, right? In which a Black person felt so held, and yet a racial incident happened to me and I had to leave halfway because there was no teacher to hold the nuance. We all know that racism has nuances that are very specific. And so the invitation is to say, when we, especially when those of us with power, meaning we are setting up practices, we are setting up retreat containers, how do we be more inclusive? And in particular of our community, as opposed to say, well, how do I get more X, Y, or Z in, but not change anything from up here? Does that make sense? So I'm happy for you. I'm really glad. I hope it continues, that practice. Really, the realms of practice for you keep on opening up. And there can be a way in which even without representation, first is representation, but also there's a way in the position of how can talk in way and share ways and have openness and have skillful means, learning to support others, and this is the hard part about this kind of work, right? Restoration doesn't mean, okay, we figure out the problem and now, okay, it needs to be fixed and then that's it, right? What makes restoration? Restoration, you just go, something has been broken, hurt, harmed. I'm sorry about that. And this is what I will do so that it won't happen again as much as possible. So we make a commitment. That's why in this book is in 3 parts, and the last part is what do I call it? What the world needs now. And it starts out with skillful action, which is usually around the precepts, but my thing is a skillful enactment, because it's not just I know the precepts, but I am committed to enacting the precepts. So we make a commitment to do better, to be more inclusive in ways that we learn, and part of it is learning to understand that we're not perfect because we've been conditioned in ways. And we need to examine how we're conditioned in all locations. And how do we inhabit our position with integrity? We can't take how we've been conditioned out per se. We can do something about how we can respond differently from here. bringing awareness to how we're conditioned is the beginning point of that. And then with it comes responsibility. Do you want to say anything else to that, Kaira Jewel?
Yes, I just really appreciate what you shared, and I also really want to thank you for naming the just courageously standing in this, presence to, how good it feels to be a Black person and be in a community of Black folks, Latin folks, Latinx folks that feels really maybe safe and home for you. And I just really want to affirm that that needs to happen. Those spaces need to exist for each and every one of us, especially because it is so often the experience that we're the only Black person, or the only BIPOC person in a space. And so none of what we're saying here is about us not getting our needs met, but just saying that when we meet our needs, which you beautifully described, we have more space in our nervous systems, in our bodies, to also be caring about other people getting their needs met, and how we give rise to this intention, may I not stand in the way of someone else getting their needs met, which was sort of the stories that Liên read of non-Asian, non-white BIPOC teachers who were in positions of authority who weren't sensitive to the needs of the students in front of them, which in this case happened to be Asian American students. So I think that's really the essence here, is that yes, please take good care of yourself, your beautiful Black body and skin and heritage and culture, and do everything to affirm and nourish that. And to me, when we do that, that will lead us to naturally, the Dharma leads us naturally, right, to open our hearts in compassion and care for everyone, and to learn with humility to see how we may be we may have blind spots, right? Each and every one of us, right? Every single person, every single group of BIPOC may have blind spots about other BIPOC groups, right? So that's really what we're wanting to be awake to together.
I would say on one level, like the first POC retreat in 1998 or whenever it was, when they did not have an Asian teacher, and they were like, oh, we just need the practice and I was one of the caretakers of the Buddhists of color, and we were like, just wait wait, so that's one. I would say, call it an Asian sitting group. There's nothing wrong with calling it an Asian sitting group. Then what you do is you go, or you say, there's so few of us when we do X, Y, and Z, when we go to retreat, this is an open invitation. And then you start making connection. You start building relationship. That's the other thing that I don't know. I don't know. I know very little about social media, but people forget that relationship is what we know. It's not, that you've been to 10,000 retreat and understand the Dharma from left and right and upside down and through, in and out. It's relationship. And so you have to build trust and confidence. This is how coalition work happens, right? We have to go through things with each other. And so it takes time. It takes time. And that's the other thing that we've seemed to have forgotten about. And part of it is also learning. It's also part of capitalism to say, you need to produce, it needs to be timely, it needs, so we want to pull back from other systems of oppressions in which it gives us these false sense of, right? Find connection as the group grows. And then you also make the effort, go to places where we're uncomfortable. put a call out, you know, make it a statement at your group, right? I know like certain people have come to me to say, oh, how can we start a BIPOC group? Blah, 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 you know? So I'm not saying do that necessarily because I don't know your community. That's what I'm trying to say, right? And in a way, this is what we're asking. Maybe we haven't got to the part where we're asking each other things because that was part of our thing. Is part of what we're asking is practice. Like the first story in here is about Roshi saying, no hatred completely, KNOW, right? I just gave away the punchline. But essentially, it's about our practices, we turn towards difficulty. We turn towards challenges. And that's also restoration practice. And so we need to learn to be comfortable with uncomfortableness, to live with the values that we really hold. You want a diverse group, then you need to be uncomfortable and work on ways in which you're going to find that group and make it an increment. It doesn't, you know, like call it what it is until it's something else. The other thing is, I would like to say, from my positionality as an Asian American in Buddhism, is that, and I'm just putting it out. Kaira Jewel, feel free to answer this one, because we did not talk about this before. There can be BIPOC groups that are led by Black folks. And it feels really weird in Buddhism that BIPOC groups don't include an Asian teacher, you know, in Buddhism. So that's for me, like, you know, the other piece, right? I mean, I'll just say a little bit, or echoing off what Kaira Jewel was saying earlier, which is, I'll tell you, there's a part of the shift in writing this book was that I was like, you know what? This is not a book about information. Sure, you're going to get information. I think I did a pretty good job around the Eightfold Path, you know, just to move forward and not do that Asian thing where, you know, try to be too moving back. And this book is a healing process. That's what it became for me. And that's what I hope it is for everyone. Because what happens is when we can heal our wounds, and our wounds are very specific. Yes, there are structures around it. And we also need to do the self-work. Part of what I'm saying, though, is that in the broad mindfulness, the unmoored version is very individualistic. And it's also very like, I like that one, so that's what I'm going to believe. I like that one, so that's what I'm going to believe. I'm going to practice that. But there's no sense. And Buddhism is a system, right? It's kind of like many years ago, I was sick a lot, and I went to the acupuncturist, and they were like, oh, yeah, you're very sick. So, yeah, not only these herbs, but you should stop doing this and go do this and because it's a whole system to how to heal yourself. And I was like, oh, I can't go for a while because it's a commitment. This is why, again, you know, it's a commitment practice. It's not a window shopping, nor is it, you know, it's kind of like I'm not a sports person really, but you cannot be a weekend warrior with Buddhism. It's a lifelong practice, or for some of us, the belief lifelong, many lives practice, all right? So it takes commitment, you know? And so that's the hard, and the hardest part that we forget that the popular mindfulness and the surface stuff doesn't tell us is that vipassana, the methodology of vipassana, is to investigate difficulties. I like to think it's a little bit like, you know, the sand in the pearl, that it rubs. And with the rubbing, the mindfulness, the quality of rubbing that's skillful, it becomes a pearl. Right? And that's the hard part of our practice. And this is one of the places in which we need to examine, right? And part of our practice of ending suffering is what hard part does not have to be hard. How do we make the structural hard stuff that doesn't have to happen because of way we've been taught, right? how do we work on that so that we release that for each of us, both in the general sense and in the specific sense? And that's why it's so important that their teachers or their leaders that can resonate with you. It doesn't mean that every time it has to happen. Don't get into the thing of like, oh, it better be there for me because I paid for this, right? We're human beings, and situations not always perfect. And yet, how much are we willing to commit to that ongoing work to keep on expanding ourselves through shifts of view, through shifts of what we have been taught to be isolated or to just keep for ourselves, and really to keep on, yes, exactly that, saying, yes, we're all kin. So if we're all kin, how do we, when I hurt, you hurt. So how do we listen to each other's hurt in a way that we can bring each other in, as opposed to stratifying our hurts, which doesn't serve any of us in the long run. Okay, that was my little pitch. Kaira, Jewel, you want a little pitch to round us?
Just briefly, because I know we're already at time.
I know we're
but
over already.
So grateful for your naming what you named, Win. And I think what I just want to offer is, because you mentioned the unrootedness, and this way that's a very much part of our Western culture, is to uproot and then cover over and possess and appropriate. And so what I've really appreciated in a couple recent retreats I've taught is the lineage acknowledgments that the teachers I've been teaching with have made at the beginning, like really taking time to say, these are where these teachings come from. They come from these places, through our Asian teachers, from India, from this lineage in Thailand, this lineage in Sri Lanka, like really naming and honoring and taking time and space to direct the whole group's attention to the beauty of the Asian roots of what we're going to be practicing in that retreat. And I've also seen it on my dear friend Kate Johnson's website. On the bottom of every page of her website is a lineage acknowledgement saying, I don't come from Asian roots, yet my teachers are Asian. This Buddhism that I practice comes from Asian teachers, and I deeply respect and honor them. And I love that. I love that kind of, that's a very African, very indigenous, very Latinx, very every other tradition of honoring our ancestors, right? We're not doing anything important before we say, where do we know that we came from, right? And so I just offer that as a practice that we might all kind of go deeper in. It's a practice I'm wanting to deepen in myself, is really acknowledge the lineage holders. And that a little bit responds maybe to your question in the chat, Charles Lee, about how to be inclusive in this American Buddhism scene. We can hold it all and say, these are the people who offered this to us, and we deeply honor them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we should say is, I know that our conversation is very much about, on a certain level, convert Buddhism only. So there are tons of other American Buddhism happening. And I will also say, in the Asian American community, we are trying to forward Indigenous people. Pacific Islanders are Indigenous people. So I know, like, I'm going to Portland State University, and their student union is Pacific Islander Asian American, right? So I really want to uplift that also. We do have a short dedication of merit of sorts, yes. So this is actually a mudita meditation on page 184 that Kaira and I are going to lead you in here. All right.
Let's just take a breath together as we just feel what's here in our bodies, knowing we've only scratched the surface here, but as we offer this dedication, unifying ourselves in our heart and minds, knowing this is a lifelong process to be present to what we have touched here today. May we know success is when we've given our best effort.
May we connect to the confidence that suffering and the causes of suffering can end.
Let us know satisfaction and contentment here and now.
May we be able to connect in the joy of knowing we're all part of wholeness. This we wish for all beings in the 10 directions and the 3 times. Thank you, everyone.
Ashe.
I really want to thank Garrison Institute and to Kaira Jewel for supporting this event. Thank you so much.